Welcome all to the Nightman's Horror Theatre. Kick back, relax, and fall asleep to the tales from the Nightman's Book of Horrors. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. The Ashford Silence. The rain had been falling for 2 straight days over Ashford, a sleepy little town on the edge of the Pennsylvania woods. The streets were empty except for the occasional pickup truck, its headlights slicing through the mist. Inside Miller's diner, the scent of burnt coffee hung in the air, mixing with the smell of fried eggs and bacon. A neon sign hummed softly in the window. Detective Clare Warren sat at the far booth, her coat still dripping from the weather outside. She was supposed to be off duty, enjoying what passed for breakfast in this town, but her eyes kept drifting to the girl sitting alone at the counter. The girl couldn't have been more than 17. She wore a thin hoodie despite the chill, her long blonde hair tangled and damp. She kept glancing at the clock above the griddle as though time was running out on something only she knew. In front of her sat a plate of untouched pancakes. Claire wasn't sure what exactly caught her attention. Maybe it was the way the girl flinched whenever the front door opened, or maybe it was the faint purplish bruise just under her left eye. Years of working homicide had taught her that people in trouble sometimes came wrapped in silence. When Claire finally rose to leave, the girl stood abruptly, slapped a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, and darted for the door. She didn't even look at the waitress who called after her. Claire followed without thinking. The girl was halfway down Main Street, her sneakers splashing through puddles, before Claire caught up. "Hey," Claire called, but the girl didn't turn. Claire jogged a few steps, cutting her off near an alley. The girl's eyes were wide, like a trapped animal's. "I'm not in trouble," she said quickly, voice trembling. "I didn't do anything." "I didn't say you did." Claire kept her tone even, non-threatening. "But you look like you could use some help." The girl shook her head. "You can't help me." "No one can." She tried to step around Claire, but then stopped as though reconsidering. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're going to find me." "Whose are they?" Claire asked. The girl's gaze flicked over Claire's shoulder toward the dark mouth of the alley. Her breathing quickened. Before Claire could turn, a black van rolled slowly past the intersection. The girl's face went pale. "They already have," she said. Then she bolted, this time disappearing into the maze of back streets before Claire could stop her. That was 3 days before the girl's body was found in the Ashford River. The Ashford River had a way of swallowing things, logs, trash, even whole cars during the spring floods. But when the sheriff's department got the call at 6:42 a.m. on Wednesday, what the river spat out was far worse. Claire stood on the muddy bank as 2 deputies in waders struggled to pull the tarp-covered body from the water. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving a grey fog clinging to the shoreline. The smell of the river, damp, metallic, faintly rotten, clung to everything. Sheriff Al Simmons, his face drawn, gave Claire a sidelong glance. "You knew her?" Claire nodded slowly. "I saw her 3 days ago. Didn't get her name. She was scared. Said someone was after her." Al swore under his breath. "We'll need you to give a statement. Maybe help us figure out who she was." The medical examiner, Dr. Mason, crouched beside the body as it was lifted onto the bank. He peeled back the top just enough to confirm the victim's identity against the missing persons bulletins. Female. Late teens. Multiple contusions on the face. Ligature marks around the wrists and ankles. "I'll know more after the autopsy." Claire forced herself to look. Even in death, the girl's expression held the ghost of that terror she'd seen in the diner. The coroner's van rumbled away, leaving deep ruts in the mud. Claire stood by the river for a long moment, replaying their brief conversation. "They're going to find me." They already have. It wasn't a random drowning. Someone had hunted her down. That afternoon, Claire sat in her small office at the Ashford Police Department, scrolling through reports. The girl had been identified as Lydia Kane, 17, reported missing from Lancaster County 2 weeks ago. Her foster mother had told police she'd run away before, usually returning after a day or two. This time, she hadn't come back. Lydia's file was thin, but what little there was painted a bleak picture: years in and out of foster homes, petty theft charges, school truancy. No stable family, no close friends anyone could name. And now, no one alive who could tell Claire what she'd been running from. Except maybe whoever had put her in the river. Claire started by pulling security footage from Miller's diner. The grainy black and white video showed Lydia sitting at the counter, glancing nervously toward the door, just as Claire remembered. But then, 10 minutes before she left, the feed caught something interesting: a man in a dark jacket entering the diner, ordering coffee to go, and watching Lydia with unsettling intensity. The man didn't approach her, at least not inside. But when Lydia ran out, the camera picked up a reflection in the glass, the same man following her at a distance. Claire froze the frame and leaned closer. The man's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but his posture, his build, something about it felt familiar. She ran the image through the department's database. A match popped up: Ethan Rourke, age 34, prior convictions for assault, unlawful restraint, and suspected involvement in a human trafficking ring out of Philadelphia. Charges had been dropped twice for lack of evidence. The problem? Rourke had supposedly left Ashford months ago. His back, Claire thought grimly. And if Rourke was involved, Lydia's death might only be the start. By midnight, the police station was quiet except for the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. Claire was still at her desk, the screen light casting deep shadows under her eyes. She had been digging through every bit of information on Ethan Rourke, cross-referencing old case files, witness statements, and parole records. One detail kept nagging her. In a prior investigation, Rourke's name had come up in connection with a missing girl from Reading, same age range as Lydia, same sudden disappearance, same riverbank ending. That case had never been solved. Claire leaned back, rubbing her temples. "What are you doing back here, Rourke?" she muttered. A knock at her door made her flinch. Deputy Harris stepped in, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was a small, water-damaged spiral notebook. "Found this downstream about a mile from where we pulled her out," Harris said. "Could be nothing, but there's handwriting inside." Claire slipped on gloves and carefully opened the bag. The notebook pages were warped from water, ink blurred in places, but one name was legible on the inside cover: Ethan. Below it: "If anything happens to me, it's him." Claire felt a cold knot in her stomach tighten. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a scream from the grave. By morning, she had a plan. She drove out to the edge of town, where the old iron plant stood abandoned, its corrugated steel walls rusting under decades of rain. According to Rourke's parole officer, he'd been spotted in this area a week ago, using one of the storage sheds as an unofficial workspace. The air inside the plant was damp and metallic. Her flashlight beam caught on broken machinery, beer cans, and a tangle of rope tossed carelessly in a corner. Then she saw it. An old mattress on the floor, stained, with a chain bolted into the wall nearby. This was no workspace. This was a holding place. She heard a shuffle of movement behind her and spun, gun raised. Ethan Rourke stepped into the beam of her flashlight, his face half in shadow, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Detective Warren," he said, voice low and gravelly. "You're trespassing." "You killed her," Clare said evenly. "Lydia came. You hunted her, just like the others." His smirk widened. "You think you can prove that?" "Your name's in her notebook." For a moment, something flickered in his expression, not fear exactly, but calculation. "Not good enough," he said. "And if I were you, I'd stop poking around before you end up in the same river." Clare held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of you." "Maybe you should be." He stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he might lunge. But then he stopped, shrugged, and walked past her toward the open doorway. When she turned to follow, he was gone, swallowed by the fog outside. Back at the station, she filed an official request for a search warrant on the iron plant and its outbuildings. But the request came back denied, lack of probable cause. The judge wanted hard evidence, not suspicion and a waterlogged notebook. It was the same wall she'd hit years ago when investigating him. Rourke knew how to cover his tracks. Clare realized she would have to play a longer game. She started shadowing him, at the bar on Main Street, at the gas station on Route 12, even following him late one night to a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The farmhouse looked abandoned, but when she peered through a broken window, she saw movement inside, a young woman, pale, with wrists bound, sitting on the floor. Clare's heart pounded. She stepped back, reaching for her phone. Looking for someone. The voice was right behind her. She turned. Rourke was standing there in the dark, hands in his jacket pockets, smiling like they were old friends. The smile on Rourke's face didn't reach his eyes. In the dim light spilling from the cracked farmhouse window, his pupils were two black pits. Clare's hand hovered near her holster, but she didn't draw. "Not yet." "You've got someone in there," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Rourke tilted his head like a man listening to a distant radio. "You sure you want to go making accusations without proof?" Clare stepped sideways, keeping him in her peripheral vision while angling toward the door. "I've got all the proof I need." He moved to block her, his boots crunching over gravel. "If you open that door, detective, you'll regret it." From inside, a muffled voice cried out, a sharp, choked sound, cut short. It was enough to make Clare's decision for her. She shoved past him, slammed her shoulder into the warped wood, and the door burst inward. The stench hit first, rot, mildew, and something coppery. A single bare bulb swung overhead, casting long shadows over the filthy floor. In the far corner sat the young woman Clare had glimpsed, duct tape across her mouth, wrists and ankles bound. Her wide eyes followed Clare's every move. Clare hurried over, crouched, and tore the tape away from the girl's mouth. "Police," she whispered. "You're safe now." The girl coughed, wincing as Clare cut the bindings. He said he'd kill me," she stammered. "Not tonight," Clare said, glancing toward the doorway. But Rourke was gone. By the time backup arrived, he had vanished into the woods behind the property, leaving only muddy footprints that disappeared in the underbrush. The girl, Amaya Torres, 21, was shivering but alive. She'd been missing for 3 days, last seen leaving her job at a diner in Allentown. "He picked me up on the side of the road," she told Clare at the hospital. "Said he could give me a ride to the bus station. Next thing I knew, I woke up chained in that room." Clare's blood ran cold. Same pattern. Same predator. That night, Clare sat alone in her apartment, the city's rain-slicked streets glistening outside her window. She thought of Lydia's body in the river, of Maya's trembling hands, of the dozens of unsolved disappearances tied together only by whispers. Rourke wasn't just a killer, he was a collector. And he wasn't done. The next morning, Clare put in for temporary leave from official duties. If the department couldn't move fast enough, she'd operate on her own terms. She planted the bait carefully. Using a burner phone, she posted in an online forum Rourke had once frequented, one that pretended to be for casual meetups but had been on the FBI's watch list for years. Her post read, "New in town. No friends. Need a ride. Cash in hand. Route 12. Tonight." She used a fake name, fake photo, but the location was real. And she waited. By sunset, the woods along Route 12 were drowning in shadow. Clare sat in her unmarked car a quarter-mile down the road, engine off, listening. At 8:14 p.m. Headlights appeared, a black van, moving slow. The black van slowed, then stopped near the bend in the road. Clare's pulse thudded in her ears as she watched through her scope. The driver's side door opened, and Ethan Rourke stepped out, scanning the darkness. He wasn't holding a weapon, at least not visibly, but Clare knew better. He carried danger the way most people carried a wallet. She let him move closer to the decoy location, an old bus shelter at the edge of the trees, lit only by a flickering bulb. She had planted a backpack on the bench, a crumpled hoodie beside it to look like someone had stepped away. Rourke approached, slow and casual, glancing around. He crouched to check the bag. That was her moment. "Police? Hands where I can see them." Rourke froze for a heartbeat, then bolted into the woods. Clare cursed, grabbing her flashlight and sidearm before tearing after him. The ground was slick from days of rain, each step sinking into mud. Her beam sliced through the trees, catching brief flashes of his dark jacket ahead. Branches slapped at her face, the smell of wet earth heavy in her nose. Somewhere off to the left, she heard the river rushing. Rourke knew these woods, his pace was confident, deliberate. He was leading her, she realized it too late. The ground vanished beneath her. She hit the slope hard, sliding down into a shallow ravine. Pain shot through her shoulder. Above her, Rourke stood at the ridge, grinning. "You don't learn, do you?" he called. "Always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Clare got to her feet, gun trained upward. "It belongs exactly here, Rourke." He took a step forward, but this time she saw the knife glint in his hand. "You think the badge makes you untouchable," he said, voice low. "But tonight..." A rustle to her right cut him off. Another beam of light sliced through the trees. "Drop the weapon!" Deputy Harris's voice rang out. Rourke hesitated, eyes darting between them. Clare didn't. One shot cracked through the air. Rourke staggered, the knife clattering to the ground. His knees buckled, and he pitched forward, sliding down the slope until he lay face up in the mud. The smirk was gone. The case closed faster than Clare expected. Forensics tied Rourke to Lydia Kane's murder, Maya Torres's abduction, and at least for other disappearances across the state. The farmhouse and the iron plant both yielded evidence, hair fibers, personal belongings, even a few Polaroids he'd kept hidden under the floorboards. But the victories felt hollow. On the day she filed the final report, Clare drove to the Ashford River. The water moved slow under the weight of the overcast sky, carrying twigs and leaves downstream. She thought about Lydia's last words to her, "They're going to find me." They already have. Clare had found him. But she couldn't shake the thought that there were others like him still out there, waiting in diners, driving dark roads at night, looking for someone whose disappearance wouldn't make the news. She dropped a single white lily into the river. It spun once in the current before drifting away. That night, she went back to her desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the first line. Case File 231, Lydia Kane. For the ones who ran, and for the ones who never got the chance. She closed the cover. This wasn't the end. Just the first chapter in a longer fight. A quiet town secret. Ashford, Maine, was the sort of town where the sound of your neighbor's truck leaving the driveway told you more about the time than a wristwatch. It was October 14th, 2019, a Monday. The leaves were at peak color, burning red, sharp orange, flecks of yellow. The kind of day people photographed for postcards. But the air that morning was unsettled, like the moment before a thunderstorm. It started with a small oddity. Emily Carver, 28 years old, didn't show up for her 7 a.m. shift at Maggie's diner. Emily wasn't the sort to sleep in. She had been working the breakfast shift for almost 3 years and hadn't been late once. At first, Maggie, the owner, figured Emily had hit the snooze button too many times. She called Emily's cell phone at 7:15. It went straight to voicemail. By 10 a.m., Russ the cook had mentioned to Maggie, "You think she's all right? She's never just not here." By lunchtime, the regulars were murmuring about it over coffee. By 4 p.m., Sheriff Bill Holloway himself was standing in front of Emily's apartment above the Ashford laundromat, rapping on the door. The door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was neat in that lived-in way, a blanket on the couch, a coffee mug on the counter with a thin ring of cold coffee inside. The TV remote sat on the arm of the couch. Her phone wasn't in the charger, but the charger was still plugged in. The fridge held milk, eggs, and leftover meatloaf from the diner in a Tupperware container. No sign of a struggle. No overturned furniture. Except for one thing, the back door that led to her narrow fire escape was unlocked. And the October air coming in carried a faint metallic chill. By evening, the whole town knew Emily was missing. Her photo, smiling, chestnut hair tucked behind her left ear, was already being shared on Facebook hundreds of times. No one knew that the last person to see her alive wasn't a friend, co-worker, or family member. It was someone who had been watching her for weeks. On the evening of October 13th, Emily had worked the 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. shift. It had been steady but not slammed, mostly locals coming in for pie and coffee. Maggie remembered Emily laughing with a customer, teasing him about ordering for slices of apple pie but only finishing half of one. At 9:08 p.m., diner parking lot security footage showed Emily walking to her red Toyota Corolla, tote bag over her shoulder. At 9:15 p.m., a gas station camera 2 blocks away caught her pulling in for fuel. She swiped her card, pumped gas, and drove off. That was the last confirmed sighting. When Sheriff Holloway spoke to her best friend Cara the next day, she said something that turned the missing person case into something darker. "She told me last week she thought someone was following her," Cara said, arms folded tightly across her chest. Said she saw the same car twice when she walked home from work, a black SUV. She said it had no plates. I told her she was probably just imagining it. Holloway didn't believe in coincidences. Not in cases like this. 2 days into the search, a hunter named Tom Becker phoned the sheriff's office. He'd been walking near an old logging road off Route 17, about 5 miles from Ashford, when he saw something bright against the dead leaves, a canvas tote bag. Inside was Emily's wallet, her ID still in it. Keys. A crumpled gas station receipt timestamped 9:16 p.m. on the night she vanished. No reason for Emily to have been in that spot. 10 yards away, tire tracks curved off the road into the woods, then abruptly stopped. The tread was deep, likely from an SUV. Near the tracks was a silver hoop earring. Cara confirmed Emily had been wearing them the night she disappeared. The search was no longer about a missing person. It was a hunt. By the third day, the search effort looked like something out of a disaster movie. Dozens of volunteers lined up shoulder to shoulder, moving slowly through the woods with flashlights and orange vests. State police cruisers were parked in every gravel pull-off. The local fire station had become a command post, maps taped to the walls, coffee urns constantly bubbling, radios crackling with updates. Sheriff Holloway knew they were fighting the clock. In cases like this, every hour mattered, and they were already on day 3. Detectives worked the traffic camera footage first. A black Chevrolet Tahoe had been spotted at 9:32 p.m. the night Emily vanished, heading north on Route 17, away from town. The Tahoe's rear license plate was obscured by mud. In the passenger seat was a faint silhouette, head slumped to the side. Cross-referencing DMV records, the Tahoe's tread matched one owned by Darren Cross, 39, from Brewer. 2 prior arrests, assault in 2011 and unlawful confinement in a domestic dispute in 2014. Charges in the second case were dropped after the victim declined to testify. That morning, they drove to Brewer. Cross was in his driveway, bent over the Tahoe's engine, grease on his hands. "Morning, Darren," Holloway said. "We're looking into the disappearance of Emily Carver. Mind if we ask you a few things?" Darren straightened, expression unreadable. "Seen the news? Terrible thing. Don't know her." They asked where he'd been the night of the 13th. "At home. Alone." Holloway's eyes drifted to the Tahoe's tires, caked with reddish-brown mud, the same color as the dirt off Route 17. "Roads around here are muddy," Darren said with a half-smirk, as if reading his thoughts. "They left without a search, not enough for a warrant." But Holloway felt the man's eyes burning into his back as they walked away. That night, a nor'easter rolled in, heavy rain, bitter wind. Most volunteers called it quits. Holloway stayed out. At nearly midnight, his flashlight caught a scrap of grey fabric snagged on a branch. He bagged it. The diner security footage confirmed Emily had been wearing a grey coat. 50 yards further in, he found fresh boot prints beside a second set of tire tracks, deeper, as if the vehicle had been loaded with weight. Size 11 boots. It was enough for a judge to sign a warrant. On October 18th, they searched the vehicle. In the back seat, strands of long brown hair caught in the seatbelt latch. In the cargo area, rope, duct tape, an unopened bottle of water. But the most damning find was a torn piece of notebook paper wedged under the driver's seat. In thick, uneven letters it read, "Emily, diner, 9 p.m., follow." They brought Darren in. At first, he kept his arms crossed, staring at the wall. Transcript excerpt. "Holloway, we found her hair in your car, Darren. We found a note with her name on it. You want to explain that?" "Cross, you got it wrong. I liked watching her. Never touched her." Detective Lane, then why did she disappear the night you followed her? "Cross, she got in my car. Wanted a ride. That's it." Holloway, and then? Cross, silence. After 6 hours, he leaned back and said, "All right. I'll take you to her." The convoy drove 20 miles into the forest on a washed-out hunting road. At the end stood a weathered cabin, windows boarded, roof sagging under wet leaves. The smell inside was suffocating, mildew, unwashed clothes, and something sharper. On a cot in the corner, under a thin blanket, was Emily. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, her face pale, eyes sunken but alive. She whispered, "I thought you'd never find me." In the hospital, Emily described that night. She'd been followed from the gas station, forced off a back road, dragged into the SUV. Darren had kept her in the cabin, rationing water and giving her one granola bar a day. He said nobody was looking, she told Holloway. He said by the time anyone missed me, I'd be gone. But she'd heard something outside on the fourth day, distant voices, maybe part of the search party. That was when Darren told her they were leaving soon. The rescue had come just in time. The trial began in March 2020. Prosecutors laid out the physical evidence, the note, the hair, the tire impressions, alongside Emily's testimony. The defense claimed Darren had been helping Emily after her car broke down, arguing the restraints were for her protection because she'd been panicked. The jury didn't buy it. After 7 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and attempted murder. Darren Cross was sentenced to 60 years without parole. Emily left Maine the following year, moving to a city where no one knew her name. Holloway stayed. The case changed him. He no longer waved away small-town rumors about strange cars or gut feelings. And every time he drove past the old logging road on Route 17, he thought about the back door of Emily's apartment, unlocked, letting in the cold October air, and the SUV idling in the dark. The hallowed remains. It was early September when the rain started. Cold, drizzling sheets that blurred the edges of the Appalachian foothills and soaked the leaves into slick, black mulch. Sheriff Dalton Reeves hated this kind of weather. It always seemed to bring out the worst in people. On the morning of the 8th, he was nursing his second coffee in the cramped station when the call came in. A hunter, name withheld for now, had been scouting deer trails along the old Brindle Creek and stumbled on something wrong. The man's voice over the radio was high-pitched, the way men sound when they're trying not to admit they're afraid. He'd found bones. Not deer. Not bear. Human. Reeves drove out in his muddy Ford, tires humming against the cracked two-lane that wound into the forest. Fog pooled low in the hollows, and every so often a crow's cry cut through the damp air. When he arrived, the hunter stood pale-faced near a grove of oaks, clutching his rifle like he wasn't sure if he should drop it or fire it. The remains were partly buried, the earth around them disturbed like something, or someone, had dug them up recently. Reeves crouched, brushing away a mat of wet leaves. A skull stared back at him, its jaw twisted at an unnatural angle. No one in town was missing. Not recently. Baggett and called Jenny from forensics, Reeves told his deputy, but even as he spoke, his eyes wandered beyond the shallow grave, where the soft earth bore marks. Not footprints exactly. Drag marks, leading deeper into the trees. The drag marks snaked through the undergrowth like some crude path. Reeves motioned for the hunter to stay put and followed them, his boots squelching in the sodden earth. The trail twisted around boulders slick with moss, under low branches that dripped water down his collar. He found the end of the trail about 50 yards in, a hollow depression beneath the exposed roots of an ancient oak. Something had been living there. The floor of the pit was littered with scraps. Torn bits of flannel, a cracked belt buckle, and the unmistakable curve of a rib bone. Reeves' stomach tightened. This wasn't the work of scavengers. It was deliberate. Collected. When Jenny arrived with the forensics van, the daylight was fading into that eerie half-light where the forest seemed to breathe. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. One glance at the pit and her lips pressed into a line. "This isn't a dump site," she said. "It's a nest." By the time they hauled the remains back to the county morgue, word had already spread through Hallows Ridge, a town that barely clung to the hillside with a population under 800. The older folks whispered that Brindle Creek had always been bad ground. Reeves had grown up here. He'd heard the stories about the brindle man, about the way livestock vanished some winters, about the barefoot prints found in snow leading into the hills but never back out. He dismissed it all as backward superstition. Until now. 2 days later, the coroner's report landed on his desk. The bones belonged to a male, mid-30s, dead for roughly 5 years. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. But there was more. Faint scoring on the bones. Knife work. Post-mortem. On the 3rd day, a hiker went missing. A college kid from out of state, camping with friends near Brindle Creek. They found his tent slashed open, sleeping bag shredded, and deep gouges in the soil like something had been dragged out in a hurry. The search party combed the woods for 2 days. When they found him, he was 30 feet up in a pine tree, lashed into the branches with strips of his own clothing. His eyes were gone. Jenny's hand shook when she took her samples. Dalton, this isn't human work. Or if it is, she didn't finish. That night, Reeves got a call from a woman named Margaret Tiller. She lived alone in a weathered farmhouse at the edge of the creek. Said she'd seen someone, or something, moving through the trees on the night the boy disappeared. Her voice was brittle with fear. Tall. Too tall. Shoulders hunched. It stopped right at the fence line like it knew I was watching. I swear, Sheriff, its eyes, they were shining. Reeves wanted to dismiss her. But the way she spoke, the tremor in her words, told him she'd seen something that had carved its way into her mind. On the 6th day, Reeves went back to the nest site alone. He didn't tell Jenny, didn't radio it in. He wanted to see it fresh, without the noise of an investigation. The rain had stopped, but the forest felt heavier, as if the air itself was watching. When he reached the hollow under the oak roots, it was different. Cleared out. The scraps were gone. In their place lay something new, a rusted hunting knife, blade still stained dark. And beneath it, a Polaroid photograph. It was of a man's face, mouth open mid-screen, eyes wide with something beyond fear. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "I keep what's mine." Reeves slipped the Polaroid into an evidence bag, but his hands felt unsteady. It wasn't the photograph itself, it was the fact that the handwriting looked old. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, like it had been waiting there for years. Yet it had appeared overnight. The woods were silent. Not the normal silence of a forest, where you can still hear the wind in the branches, or the creak of old trunks shifting. This was absolute. The kind of silence that feels deliberate. He turned to leave and froze. In the distance, just at the edge of sight between the trees, something tall was standing perfectly still. Shoulders hunched, arms too long, head tilted in that wrong, puppet-like way. Reeves blinked, and it was gone. That night, Jenny called from the morgue. "Dalton, you need to get down here now." When he arrived, the rear door was splintered. The cooler unit stood wide open. The remains from the first body, the skull, the bones, were gone. Jenny's voice cracked. This isn't someone trying to cover their tracks. It's like they wanted them back. Reeves stared at the empty slab. Somewhere deep in his mind, the old childhood rhyme surfaced. The brindle man keeps what's his. He'll take it back, bone and skin. Hide inside, and don't go near, or you'll be his by end of year. The next day, Reeves drove out to check on Margaret Tiller. Her screen door hung open, creaking in the breeze. Inside, the house smelled of copper and rot. Margaret was gone. The only thing left in her kitchen was a smear of muddy prints across the floor, long, barefoot impressions that stopped right in front of the sink, then simply vanished. On the counter sat another Polaroid. Margaret's face, eyes glassy, mouth pulled into a grimace of pain. Same handwriting on the back, "She's mine now." By then, the town was gripped in a quiet panic. People stopped going out at night. Curtains stayed shut. But every morning, Reeves heard whispers of something moving along the tree line. He knew he should call in the state police, maybe even the FBI. But something told him this thing, whatever it was, didn't operate by the rules of normal predators. So he went back into the Brindle Creek woods, deeper this time, following the narrow animal trails until the ground began to slope down into a ravine. The air grew colder, thick with a smell like damp soil and spoiled meat. At the bottom, he found it, a cave mouth, half hidden behind a tangle of roots. Inside, the walls were lined with crude shells carved from the rock. On them sat bones, arranged by size. Skulls were stacked in neat pyramids. Torn clothes hung from nails like trophies. And in the center, sitting cross-legged on the dirt, was the thing. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched tight over bone. Limbs too long, fingers ending in cracked nails. Its head tilted when it saw him, and those eyes, pale, milky, but reflecting light, fixed on him like a spotlight. In its lap lay Margaret's body, her head resting limply against its chest. Reeves raised his gun. The thing smiled. It spoke, though its lips barely moved. The voice was a rasp, like wind through dead leaves. "You can't take what's mine, but you can join them." In that moment, Reeves felt something pulling at him, not physically, but in his mind. Images flashed, the first victim screaming, the boy in the pine tree, Margaret's terrified face. And then, something else. A vision of himself, pale and lifeless, sitting among the trophies. He fired. Once. Twice. The cave shook with the sound. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. So was Margaret. So were the bodies. Reeves stumbled out of the woods before dawn, the Polaroid in his pocket still warm. It was a new one of himself, eyes wide, mouth open mid-screen. Back in town, no one believed him. Jenny left 2 weeks later. The official story was a drifter, a killer hiding in the hills. Case closed. But Reeves knows better. At night, he hears the whisper at his window. The Brindle man keeps what's his. He'll take it back, bone and skin. And sometimes, when the moon is gone, he swears he sees a tall shadow by the tree line, waiting. The Ledger Man. The Dunning property sat on the edge of Willow Creek like a forgotten tooth, yellow paint peeling in ragged curls, shutters banging in the wind. Detective Cara Mendez stood at the bottom of the sagging front steps, the November cold finding its way through the seams of her coat. The call had come from maintenance. A two-man crew clearing the foreclosed house had found something wrong in the basement. They wouldn't say more over the phone, but she could hear it in their voices, that brittle tone people use when they've seen something they can't process. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, smelling of dust, mildew, and something sharper beneath it, like burnt hair. The basement stairs groaned under her boots. The men who'd found the discovery stood near the far wall, pale and restless, their gloves still on, dust clinging to their work pants. The body was wedged under the lowest steps, hidden behind loose paneling that had been nailed over decades ago. Mummified by the dry air, the skin had pulled tight over bone, the clothes hanging in brittle tatters. What struck Cara wasn't just the preservation. It was the eyes, sewn shut with neat, deliberate stitches of black thread. Pinned to the man's chest was a single, yellowed sheet of paper, torn from a ledger book. Entry number 47, debt paid in full. Property records confirmed the house had belonged to Harold Dunning, a local bookkeeper who'd vanished in the late 80s. The official story was that he'd skipped town after a scandal involving missing funds from a construction firm. In the living room, crime scene techs were combing through the walls for hidden spaces. Behind a false panel, they found a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded in some places, but each entry followed the same formula: a name, a date, and the word paid. Some names were decades old. Others were disturbingly recent. And every 10th name bore a red slash across the page. Clare flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was steady, the ink darker, fresher. Clare spent the next 2 days in the records room, cross-referencing names from the ledger with death certificates. Out of the first 20 she checked, 12 were confirmed dead. Every death matched its ledger date exactly. The causes varied: a boating accident in 1993, a house fire in 2002, an overdose in 2018. But there was one detail that wasn't in the official records. When she pulled old autopsy photos from archives, the same black thread appeared. Eyes sewn shut, just like the man in the basement. She contacted Dr. Maureen Glass, the county medical examiner. Glass confirmed what Clare suspected: none of the stitching would have been possible pre-mortem without severe damage to the eye tissue. These were post-mortem acts. Deliberate. Ritualistic. Willow Creek was a small place, and small towns have long memories. Clare stopped at Donnelly's diner for coffee and overheard 2 old men at the counter. They weren't talking about Dunning's finances. They were talking about the collector. "They say he kept books on everybody," one said, stirring his coffee slow. "If you owed, didn't matter how small, he'd put you in there. And once your name was in, there was no crossing it out." The other man snorted. "Just stories. Dunning's been gone 30 years. But when Clare stepped out into the cold, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from across the street. Back at her desk, Clare opened the ledger again. She'd scanned the final page earlier, but now she noticed something she hadn't before: faint indentations on the blank page after the last entry. She shaded over them with pencil until the words emerged. Clare Mendez, the 14th of November, 2023, paid. Her throat tightened. That was yesterday's date. The floorboards in the office creaked. She turned, but no one was there. Chapter 6, First Warning. That night, she stayed late at the precinct, reviewing files. Around midnight, the power flickered. When it came back, there was a Polaroid photo on her desk. She hadn't heard anyone enter. It was a picture of her, taken from outside her apartment window. In the image, she was sitting at her kitchen table, reading the ledger. Scrawled on the back, "Some debts aren't paid in money." The deeper Clare dug, the more she saw the pattern. Every victim in the ledger had 2 things in common: a financial dispute and a connection to Harold Dunning's former clients. It was as if someone had been continuing his collections long after he disappeared. But how? Dunning would be in his 70s now. And if it wasn't him, who had the ledger? She tracked down Louise Carmichael, the daughter of one of the ledger's older victims. Louise was 83 and lived in a weathered farmhouse outside town. When Clare mentioned Dunning, Louise's face went pale. "I saw him," she whispered. "Not in the 80s. Last winter. Standing in my yard, same suit, same hat. I thought it was a ghost. But ghosts don't breathe steam in the cold." The night after visiting Louise, Clare came home to find her front door ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but the ledger was gone. In its place, on the coffee table, was a length of black thread and a needle. She knew then it wasn't just investigation anymore. She was on the list. She found him in the Dunning basement. Or rather, he was waiting. Older, gaunt, but unmistakably Harold Dunning. His hands were gloved, a needle threaded in black between his fingers. "You were late with your payment," he said in that calm, bookkeeper's voice. "But I always collect. You've been in my books a long time, detective. You just didn't know it." She kept her weapon trained on him, but her hands were slick. "You're going to tell me what the ledger means?" He chuckled softly, a dry, papery sound. "The ledger is the truth. Every debt has to be paid. If the world won't collect, I will." There was no sudden rush, no scream, just the slow, deliberate steps as he moved toward her. In his right hand, the needle glinted. He was faster than she expected for someone his age. The needle slashed across her cheek before she could pull the trigger. She fired once, twice, the shots thundered in the low ceiling, but he didn't fall. Instead, he staggered back against the wall, grinning. You can't kill a man who already paid. Something moved in the darkness behind him, shapes half-formed, like outlines in smoke. As he stepped forward again, she realized they were faces. Dozens of them, mouths stitched, eyes sealed shut. She kicked the old panel loose and scrambled for the stairs. His footsteps followed, slow, measured, never hurrying, as if he knew she couldn't leave without him allowing it. She burst into the night air, stumbling across the overgrown lawn. The sound of the wind in the bare trees masked his steps until she reached her car. The driver's side door was open. On the seat sat the ledger, flipped to a fresh page. Her name was there again, but the date had changed. Tomorrow. A single black thread lay coiled beside it, like a bookmark. She grabbed the ledger, slammed the door, and drove without looking back. The next morning, she returned with 2 patrol units. The basement was empty. The false wall was gone. The stairs had been replaced with new wood, raw and clean, as if no one had touched them in decades. No Harold Dunning. No bodies. No ledger. Only a single Polaroid tacked to the wall, her own face caught mid-screen. Weeks passed. Kara took leave from the department. She told herself she was finished, that she'd never set foot in Willow Creek again. But one night, she found an envelope on her kitchen counter. Inside was a torn ledger page. Entry number 48, Kara Mendez, paid in full. And beneath it, written in careful, even script. Some debts are paid in money, others in blood. Yours is almost cleared. She burned the page in the sink, but the smoke curled upward in thin, black threads, twisting like stitches in the dark. In the county morgue's cold storage, drawer C14 held an unclaimed male corpse, late 60s, gaunt frame. No ID, no fingerprints on record. On the tag, someone had written in neat black ink, Harold Dunning, debt collector. When the attendant checked the drawer the next morning, it was empty. Room 6. The rain was still falling when Detective Michael Raines got the call from dispatch. Blackthorn Motel. Possible DOA in room 6. Manager says it's locked from the inside. He almost told them to send uniformed officers. Motels were rarely homicide scenes. Usually overdoses, sometimes a drifter freezing to death in winter. But the voice on the other end had a tremor. 15 minutes later, he was stepping out of his unmarked sedan into the glow of the motel's flickering neon sign. The rain turned the parking lot into a mirror, stretching the letters so they read backward, Iknikav. The manager, a small woman with a weathered face and nicotine-yellow fingertips, met him under the awning. Room 6. Been here 3 nights. Housekeeping can't get in. Bolts on from the inside. The hallway smelled of bleach and mildew. The carpet was thin enough that Rains felt the concrete through his soles. When he reached the door to room 6, he knocked. Police? No answer. He tried the knob. Locked. The manager passed him the master key. Still wouldn't turn. She bit her lip, handed him a thin steel bar, the emergency lock release. The door opened with a reluctant click, and the smell hit him first, sweet rot, with a chemical edge that burned his nose. The room was dark except for the blue-grey flicker of a TV tuned to static. On the bed lay a man in his 40s. Eyes wide. Mouth open, as if mid-breath when he died. Above the bed, written in blocky, black letters on the wall. "You're next, Michael." There was no wallet, no phone, no luggage. The man's shoes were neatly lined by the door. The only personal item was a battered leather journal on the nightstand. Every page was filled with dates, times, and 2 or 3 letter initials. He flipped to the most recent entry, 3:42 a.m., Mr. Room 6. Mr. His initials. He scanned further back. Pages and pages of names. A few initials he recognized from unsolved case files that had haunted him for years. Back at the precinct, he had CSU bagged the journal. He went to work cross-referencing. First name on the list, E.T. Emma Talbot. Dead in a roadside motel 2 towns over, 2009. Cause of death, undetermined. Door locked from inside. Second, L.K. Leonard King. Died in a truck stop lodge in 1998. Same circumstances. The deeper he went, the further back it went, all the way to 1983. 32 deaths. Everyone in a locked room. Everyone with no sign of forced entry. The oldest case, 1983, was a John Doe found in a motel outside Omaha. Back then, the police chalked it up to suicide. But Rains found an autopsy note buried in the file, hands folded on chest, eyes open. Smell of ammonia. The ammonia, he'd smelled it tonight, faint under the rot. At his desk, Rains kept going over the last journal entry, 3:42 a.m., Mr. Room 6. Every entry had a time attached. And when he cross-referenced death certificates, those times matched official estimates of time of death. The killer wasn't just recording who, he was recording when. That night, Rains tried to sleep. The rain had stopped, but the neon glow from the Blackthorn sign, visible from his apartment window, still pulsed faintly in the distance. At 3:42 a.m., his phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single text, "Room 6 is ready." When he looked back toward the motel, the neon flickered, though the place had been dark and empty for hours. He went back. No backup. No warrant. Just his gun and the journal photocopies in his coat pocket. The parking lot was empty, the office dark. But room 6's door stood open a few inches. Inside, the bed was freshly made. On the nightstand sat the journal, a fresh page waiting, a pen resting on top. He felt it before he saw it, that prickling at the base of the neck when you know you're being watched. The bathroom door was cracked open. In the mirror's reflection, something stood in the corner of the bedroom. Tall. Unmoving. Face indistinct, as though the shadows themselves refused to reveal it. The pen rolled across the page by itself, scratching out 3:42 a.m., Mr. Room 6. Rains lunged for the door, but it slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked into place on its own. The thing in the corner didn't move, but the air in the room thickened, heavy as wet sand. his vision blurred, and the smell of ammonia burned his lungs. When his knees hit the carpet, the figure finally stepped forward. Its face came into focus. It was the man from the bed earlier that night. He woke in the parking lot, sprawled across the hood of his car. Room 6 was dark, door shut. The journal was gone. The only thing in his pocket was a motel key with a cracked plastic fob. Stamped on the metal tag, Room 6. A week later, a drifter was found dead in a highway motel 2 counties over. Locked from the inside. On the nightstand was a leather journal. The last entry read, 3:42 a.m. Mr. Room 6, paid.